Morocco just won AFCON 2 whole months after they lost it to Senegal. The CAF Appeals Committee apparently says that Senegal forfeit that match by walking out of the pitch for 17 minutes. And so they're awarding that game to Morocco 3-0. And so essentially, Morocco are the winners of AFCON 2025. But I was there at the stadium. I saw Senegal win it. Yes, they walked out of the pitch for 17 minutes. It was chaotic. We all know that. But then Gianni Infantino, who leads FIFA, Patrice Motsepe, who leads CAF, they gave the trophy to Senegal. Senegal celebrated at the stadium in Rabat. They had a whole parade back in Dakar. They celebrated, they have their medals, all of that, and now you're trying to take away that from them. The Senegalese Federation calls this an unprecedented, unfair, and unacceptable decision, and they're going to appeal to the Court of Arbitration for Sport in Switzerland. They will probably win that. CAS has overturned CAF decisions in the past, but this makes African football look so bad. Many Africans feel that CAF favors Morocco. This trophy is won on the pitch, not by email. That's what one Senegalese player says, and there are many who agree. This is confusing, so who do you consider the winners of AFCON 2025? Is it Morocco or is it Senegal?
All right, who are the winners of AFCON 2025? Is it Morocco or is it Senegal? That and many more stories. Welcome to This Week in Africa, your weekly live stream where we talk about all things happening on the continent of Africa. Before we get into our stories, we will start with some introductions. I'll turn it over to you, Gloria, before I do mine.
Hello, everybody. My name is Gloria Ayo. I am the founder of Diaspora Station. Basically, what we do is we talk about history and things, sometimes current affairs, things that have to do with Africa and the diaspora. And of course, I'm also an analyst on the side. So once again, I'm very happy to be back on This Week in Africa with Joe Hatagwa.
Yes, and I am Joe Hatagwa, founder of Authentic African Media. We help people visit, move, and invest on the continent of Africa. We're bridging the gap between those living on the diaspora and those living on the continent. So weekly, we bring stories to you from Ghana, Sierra Leone, and around the continent. I mentioned those two countries because those are the two countries I spend the most time in. Basically 30% of my time is spent in those two countries. And for those who are thinking about visiting, moving, and investing there, I do some consulting for those two specific countries. And then I do overall consulting for the continent of Africa. And we want to give you guys the news all around the continent so you guys are aware what's happening in countries you may want to visit, move, or invest in. So with that, let's get into the first story. As you saw at the top, very controversial decision made by the CAF, which is the Confederation of African Football. They dramatically overturned the AFCON's final result. You guys might remember we discussed this sometime last year, at the end of last year. And AFCON is the Africa Cup of Nations. That is kind of the pre-qualifiers to the World Cup. It is a tournament that happens in Africa prior to the World Cup, and it is the pride of Africa. For those of you who watch football or soccer, I am culturally American, so we call it soccer, but everyone else, almost everyone else around the world, except for maybe South Africa, calls it football. So big deal in Africa. Morocco has won previously, and there was some controversy around the Moroccan player who thanked everybody else but Africa. And there was a lot of discussion about sub-Saharan Africa versus those in Northern Africa, and do they see themselves as African? There's a lot of questions around pride and this idea of being African. So it's not just a tournament, but it really is more about African pride and the continent itself. So obviously, as you saw in that initial video, Senegal was stripped of their title, and Morocco was crowned the champions after 2 months of discussion, etc. What was supposed to be a landmark tournament showcasing Africa's footballing excellence has now been overshadowed by a controversy, so raising serious concerns about governance, transparency, and the future of the sport in the region. So we will say that there is a particular clause in CAF's I guess, rules of play that says if the team leaves the field of play, they automatically forfeit 3-0. So that is what Morocco is basically protesting and asking for the overturn of Senegal's win. And it looks like CAF initially has stated that Senegal has now lost 3-0 to Morocco. So we'll go to this video that speaks a little bit to the response from Senegal, and then we'll have some more commentary on the other side.
Hi, you're watching First Sports. I'm Rupa Ramani. Let's get started. On the show today, Senegal is furious and the government has now stepped in. The matter of the stripped AFCON title has escalated. Is this the darkest hour for Africa that is trying to show its might in the world of football? Venezuela beat USA in base. Lamine Yamal chipped in with 1 goal. Possible corruption. CAF is under fire, but more than anything, African football is under threat of regressing. Is this the worst chapter in Africa's footballing history? Africa has always had to fight to be seen, fight to claim their place in footballing excellence. They had to fight perceptions and constant questions of whether they truly belong at the top. It's been a seemingly never-ending cycle, and this year's AFCON was supposed to put a full stop to all speculations and doubts. It was supposed to end the debate about whether Africa is top-tier stuff, and it did. Infrastructurally, it was magnificent. The fans, the attendance, and the passion was all there. It was world-class, the talent for all to see and applaud. The tournament delivered on all counts.
All right, so that video is rather lengthy, so I think we can just get right to it. Gloria, your thoughts on this overturning after we covered the hesitancy giving the trophy to Senegal from what we could see and what was allegedly the heads of CAF wanting to give the trophy to Morocco. But what are your thoughts on this overturning?
Yeah, and what makes this very confusing is the fact that obviously the trophy was lifted back in January, medals were distributed, the streets of Dakar and the rest of Africa, well, at least some parts of Africa, erupted in celebration. But the Royal Moroccan Football Federation did not accept the result, as we know, and they launched an appeal based on the technicalities of the walk-off. The initial disciplinary hearing in late January focused on things like fines, individual suspensions, imposing over $1 million in penalties on both sides. But then this ruling by the appeal board went much further. Invoking Articles 82 and 84 of the AFCON regulations, Article 82 is explicit. If a team refuses to play or leaves the ground before the regular end of a match without the referee's permission, they are deemed to have forfeited. Article 84 mandates that a forfeited match be recorded as a 3-0 loss for the offending side. The appeal board's logic was that the forfeit was triggered the moment the players left the pitch, and the fact that they returned to finish the game did not annul the initial breach. So I just want, because I know, Joe, you were asking about, we're talking about what Article 82 and 84 suggested. So I just wanted to give that background. However, this is virtually unprecedented in the history of major international football tournaments. While teams have walked off in the past, the awarding of a title to the losing finalist 2 months after the final whistle has never happened, at least not in modern history. And we cannot ignore the tension. Obviously, I did do a video where I actually asked people, Larry also did the same thing, but I actually asked people to vote on who they thought was the real winner. Now, perhaps Larry and I have different audiences, but based on what I saw, the results, the votes tallied, or rather, they fluctuated between 95 and 96%. So 95 and 96% people supported Senegal as the winners of AFCON. And of course, there were some Moroccans in the comments, going off, it's to be expected. But honestly, it's really, not only is it embarrassing on a global scale, it's really heartbreaking. I mean, is this how we conduct ourselves? This isn't to justify Senegal's walk-off, but they did allow the game to end. But we also have to understand Morocco has invested billions in football infrastructure. It has positioned itself as the epicenter of the African game and a co-host for the 2030 World Cup. So this influence has basically led to perceptions of a power shift within CAF, with the Senegalese government and football officials openly alleging that Morocco now dictates the law, basically to the Confederation's president, Patrice Motsepe. So at this point, I've always noticed this, even long before people started, before this AFCON situation, I've always believed that Africa feels like two Africas. We can go all the way back to colonialism, to see how we even got here. Of course, there's a lot of colorism, racism, but this, what has happened with AFCON is only reflective of the deeper issues on the continent when it comes to the divide between North Africa and the rest of Africa.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think one of the challenges that I have with this is that, Article 82 and 84 were instated and applied throughout the games, after the games, during the appeals process, and it feels like it has not been reviewed or discussed in any of those additional stages. Now, to be fair, rule is the rule, right? You walk off, you lose 3-0. Like you walk off, you forfeit. You forfeit, you lose 3-0, right? And so those two, 82 and 84, are the rules of the game. It's just interesting that nobody from Morocco's side or CAF did anything or knew to say anything during the game when Senegal walked off, after they came back to continue the game, after it was awarded, throughout the appeals process. It wasn't until emails, etc., as stated recently, where it was brought to bear that this is a rule, and it was not followed. So I don't know why that is. But at the end of the day, if you have a rule in place, it generally applies. I just don't know how it works when you have a rule in place and you don't act based on that rule, and then you want to act based on that rule months later. So I think the biggest challenge with this is, one, Senegal should have known that rule and not walked off. I know everything that happened that day, which was unfair, but at the end of the day, even with everything that was being done by the referees and the Morocco players to try to distract and to stop Senegal from winning, they still won on the field, and they were on their way to winning. And so by walking off, they opened themselves up to this particular issue, right? I don't know how well known this is. As I mentioned, I think that everybody should understand the rules of international play, right? Ignorance of the rules does not mean that you get to go without the rules, right? So that happens in every sport, right? So, but generally, even if people feel like it was not fair, it almost always has to be appealed within a window of time. And generally the chance to do something about it happens within that moment, days after max. So to go 2 months later obviously has a lot to do with Morocco's influence. But at the end of the day, the question is, if that rule applies, should it apply this late in the game? But it should have applied on the field of play, to be honest with you. But also other rules that
Right.
should have been followed by CAF should have been applied to Morocco on the field of play as well. I can think that, if you want to be charitable to these folks, you might say CAF was afraid to make that decision on the field because there was a lot of aggression. There were some Senegalese fans that were breaching barriers, etc. But at the end of the day, they didn't make it even immediately following. They waited until this long. The reason why we're even reporting on this isn't generally like the big news stories that we report on. But the reason why we're telling you guys this is because there's broader implications as to what Bath Travels is saying, right? There's a lot of thoughts about the sub-Saharan Africa versus Northern Africa and how people feel towards Southern Africans. I will tell you, I went to Egypt, and I remember walking into one of these really nice hotels for a sales conference, and it did not feel like Africa. I mean, I've been to a few countries on the continent, and when I was in Egypt, it felt like I was somewhere else. And some points it felt like I was in Europe, and other points it felt like maybe I was somewhere in West Asia. It just did not feel like I was on the continent of Africa, and I was not welcomed like I was on the continent of Africa, when, going to the front desk, etc. So that's a conversation for another time, but I understand just from my own personal experience, anecdotally, what we're dealing with here. So
can I also add to that? I'm sorry.
Sure.
Before people found out, I guess some people, and the word sub-Saharan, I have a whole thing about that I'll do a topic on at some point, but I'm only referencing it for official reasons and just to clarify, or should I say the rest of Africa. But when I visited Morocco, it did feel like I was in another country. I was actually really surprised. Thankfully, my experience there was not negative. I have heard people since say there have been negative experiences, but my own experience, and sorry you experienced that in Egypt, nobody needs to feel like they don't belong anywhere or they're out of place. You know what I mean? Obviously, you're not from there, but you don't want to feel out of place. But Morocco was a completely different experience. And that just shows that the rest of Africa is not even aware of, again, to explain just how divided we are. We're not even aware of what's going on that side of the continent because it's become like alien to us in a sense.
Absolutely. And to I know in the interest of time, we can move on to the next story, but we wanted to just make sure you guys were aware of that story. So now an interesting one. A growing number of South Africans are returning from abroad, meaning the United States. This comes as citizens consider leaving under the refugee program introduced by the United States administration of Donald Trump following unfounded claims of so-called white genocide, I guess is what they use as their terminology here in the country. Government data shows thousands of people are reclaiming their citizenship status in South Africa, with around 12,000 checks recorded on an online portal launched in November last year. So we will play a little bit of a video here from Newsroom Africa and have some commentary on the other side.
All right, let's turn to this story now, because there's a growing number of South Africans returning home from abroad. This comes as some citizens consider leaving under a refugee program that was introduced by the United States administration of Donald Trump following unfounded claims of a so-called white genocide in the country. Government data shows thousands of people are reclaiming their citizenship status, with around 12,000 checks recorded on an online portal launched in November last year. To unpack what may be driving this trend, we're now joined by the CEO of DNA Employer of a Record, that's Anton van Heerden, as we get into this one. Anton, the grass isn't always greener on the other side. It might just be greener where you water it.
Absolutely. And that's what our employees say. People who return to South Africa have that same sentiment. So they say that, things are better here for many reasons. Cost of living standards are better. And then all the obvious stuff, family and friends, weather, and so forth. So that's definitely the case.
All right, we'll leave it there. Gloria, your thoughts. I know we talked about this a bit before, exposing the refugee program in the United States and how terrible it is. And hopefully this brings more, sheds more light to the refugee program in the United States. But beyond that, just the irony of this particular story. Your thoughts?
I'm actually quite exhausted with the back and forth. Do you want to stay or do you want to leave? You have to make up your mind, because we told them, we told you that there was no such thing as this claim. Are there, is there crime in South Africa? There is, but it's not targeting a certain group of people. We have made this clear. We've shown the facts. We've expressed several times in several ways that this is fake news. Now there's no proof bigger, no confirmation bigger than you going back from whence you came. Oh, what? The grass is not so green after all? It's reeking of privilege. Because why would I flee persecution? And I know it's not just people who were given the refugee status that are going back. It's actually even South Africans in general, or white South Africans in general, which actually makes it more ironic. People are leaving. If I know that, oh, my group is being targeted and they're facing all this persecution, I'm not going back. I don't know if there could have been some kind of clause in the, a little disclaimer in the refugee signing that you're not allowed to go back to the site of persecution. And what is really ironic and painful in all of this, and I know I'm making because it's really ridiculous at this point, but what I find extremely hurtful is the fact that there are real people on the continent who actually have needs. You think about Congo, you think about Sudan. There are people in these countries that could use some relief. But America, Donald Trump specifically, chooses to sympathize with a group of people who look like him based on a narrative that is not even true. You're not gonna now y'all are claiming that America is so I don't know about you, Joe, but I was a little offended with America is so much crime in America. Why? Oh, you're scared now? What are you afraid of? Is America really, like, please don't come and be painting America in a negative way because you were claiming that SA was a certain way. Be consistent. And I don't know what part of America you live in, but please don't come here and be painting America with the bad lights just because you're privileged. Is not the same thing, because you came to America and you saw that it's a level playing field. Welcome to the real world. This is life. This is reality. Your privilege can only take you so far on the African continent. We know what happened from 1652 with your ancestors. Don't even play with me. See, this is why I didn't want to comment on this, but go ahead, Joe.
Well, I think what's happening in the United States is that mediocrity is not awarded as much as it used to be. So, a lot of folks, I think, are coming here thinking that, whatever they were doing in South Africa can easily translate to whatever they plan to do here in the United States. And for many of them, they're just taking advantage of a program that was introduced to them. The irony on this is, obviously there are other refugee programs where people have, or asylum programs, I should say, where people have signed up for asylum, come to the United States, and the United States has sent them to third-party countries. And you would think in this instance, if these folks were witnessing some kind of genocide, they'd be going to one of these third-party countries. Rwanda, who's been accepting them. Other countries, there's been, I think, 4 other countries on the continent that has been accepting third-party, quote-unquote, asylum seekers, third-party migrants. And it's interesting that they're just going right back to the country where prosecution, quote unquote, is actually happening, which obviously is not happening. There were a select few who got on the radar of the wealthiest person in the world. And then, of course, who, while he was standing next to probably one of the most powerful people in the world, in the president of the United States. And a lot of really weird, incorrect pictures were shared and shown to the president of South Africa while he was in the White House. They were showing pictures of mass graves in the Congo, saying that these were mass graves of white farmers in South Africa. And that just was not true. But that also was not at all disputed in real time by Ramaphosa, the president of South Africa. Unfortunately, he just kind of let him say all of what he said, and then to some degree did a little bit of pushback in the presser afterwards. So there was no real-time correction. There was no fact checking in real time from the person who should be there to be able to defend what is happening in his country. I don't know if there are too many other countries that would allow someone, a president of another nation, to say certain things that are untrue about your nation right in front of you, and you just stand and watch them. But that is what happened. So there was a number of things that led to what now you see as this very strange process of people being the only people allowed to have refugee status or asylum status in the United States, the only immigrant class that was allowed to do that, and then also the only ones of those who have already been in that group to go back to their original country. Very strange, and I think it exposes a lot of things. One, the clear fact that it wasn't a genocide. Two, more importantly, it exposes the fact that the refugee and the asylum program in the United States needs an overhaul. It's terrible, and that it absolutely needs an overhaul. And this is, I think, the first time national news outlets had done any reporting on the status of where refugees end up, lodging when they come to the United States. So, the story's kind of come and gone in terms of the news cycle in the U.S. covering what happens for these refugees, for these migrants, I should say, what happens to refugees outside of the South African migrants. And so we hope that continues, that story continues to be told. That's part of the reason why we're talking about this today, because we want everybody else to be aware of that, especially since many of you guys are in the West, and specifically many of you guys are in the US watching this content. And so it should be clear that the places that they're staying are substandard, and the only time it's ever been reported on is when these people of Dutch descent from South Africa have mentioned the conditions that they were in. All right, next we move on to another story, and this one is more, and this comes from our friends at Sovereign Media. You guys might be familiar with them. Some of them formerly were in the African Stream organization. I don't know how much I should say that online, but we're familiar with some of these folks, right? People that you may have seen on this channel before. So the brutal reality of American humanitarian aid is being exposed by a report that the U.S. may gamble with the lives of 1.3 million patients of HIV in Zambia to secure a monopoly over the country's minerals. So we're going to play this video. There's going to be not a lot of audio. There's some reading there to begin with, but we'll play this video and then we'll have some more commentary on the other side. Sign giving the deal greater access to the African country's minerals. The potential threats were reported by the New York Times, who obtained a copy of a memo prepared by the U.S. State Department Secretary Marco Rubio. 1.3 million Zambians depend daily on this support from the U.S. President's emergency plan for AIDS relief. Zambia is leading producer of copper and holds significant reserves of lithium and cobalt. The U.S. considers these minerals critical for green energy and its tech sector. Following major foreign aid cuts, the U.S. is pressuring countries to sign new agreements with specific conditions to access funds and minerals. The memo suggests that the U.S. seeks greater access to Zambia's minerals at China's expense. The memo said that the new deal would involve the potential use of sticks, and warned that Zambia must comply because other countries are watching. By holding the survival of 1.3 million hostage, the United States reveals that humanitarian aid can function as a tool of control rather than compassion. Your thoughts, Gloria?
The one advantage I would say of this administration is that it has exposed so much that throughout history we probably thought were certain acts that were well-intentioned. I'm going to just go back to 2003 when George W. Bush established the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, known as PEPFAR. And Zambia has actually been one of its primary beneficiaries. Zambia has received over $6 billion in the last 20 years. However, the return of the Trump administration in 2025 brought a transactional lens to these relationships. The freeze on foreign aid in early 2025, followed by the dissolution of USAID in July 2025, showed that, at least according to the American government, there was a transition towards something that was more reciprocal, where it could be more mutually beneficial, it seemed. And some people came out, even Africans included, and that very wealthy man you talked about, the wealthiest man on earth, they all came out to talk about how this was that Africa did not need aid after all, which I have always agreed with anyway. But the abrupt removal of these things for me was the big controversy. Of course, countries like Nigeria and Uganda signed new MOUs under these terms. However, Zambia's president, Hakainde Hichilema, has balked, leading to the current threat of sticks to ensure compliance. The core of the dispute lies in three unprecedented conditions that are found in the draft MOU. First, the US is demanding that Zambia provide one-way access to its citizens' health data for a period of 10 years. This is a move that critics such as the Zambian civil society have labeled as a violation of national sovereignty, and it just doesn't sound right. Second, the US requires Zambia to contribute $340 million of its own fiscal resources toward health spending to earn a reduced $1 billion 5-year aid package. Third, and most controversially, the US is using the aid as a wedge to break what it perceives as China's preferential access to Zambian mines. So this involves demanding a renegotiation of mining regulations and the sharing of sensitive mining databases with US experts. Just looking at this on the surface does not seem right. Why does Africa always bear the brunt? At the end of the day, Africa carries the entire world. I cannot emphasize this enough. Africa carries the world. And because they know, and this is where I have to bring our leaders in, Joe, because they know that our leaders are not going to stand for what is right. They know that our leaders are going to sell the people out for the most part. We have a couple that know better. They're going to keep exploiting and taking advantage of that. This is a very cheap deal. You want access to our resources for our, you want our data. It's at this point, it's blackmail. If you ask me, it's actually absolute blackmail. You want our resources. And I mean, the terms and conditions don't even make any sense. Would you try this with a United Kingdom or Canada? And speaking of Canada, somebody's watching from Canada. Thank you.
Yeah. And I'll just add one thing. I would specifically even speak to another country in West Asia that the United States supports with a ton of aid. That is under very few stipulations. You guys know the country. If we mention it here, we get in trouble. So I won't mention the country, but there's a lot of aid going and money going to that country. Very, very wealthy country in West Asia. You guys know who we're talking about. People have been accused of committing a genocide over the last 36 months, right? There are very few stipulations for them when that aid is given. But in Africa, there's stipulations given. I only use that as an example because there's not a lot of aid from America given to like European countries, but there is one specific country where a ton of aid goes to with very few stipulations. But when it comes to Africa, there are. Now, here's what I would say. The one thing out of all the stipulations that the United States had with Zambia in this is that Zambia has to invest $300 million in their own money in their own country. Now, Burkina Faso has decided that they're going to do 140 million or 110 million or something to that effect in their own country for their own aid with their own deal. I do believe that one way to get yourself off of aid is if you have a commitment to spend the money that you're generating, right? Because we know that all these countries have money that they generate. It just never really goes back to the people. And so I would love to see that kind of aid actually spent on these critical resources in country. I don't know if 300 million is available for aid because I don't know how much money comes in and out of the coffers of the federal government there. But you would want to see a significant amount invested in their own country so that we don't have to have the aid coming from other countries. So in an ideal world where there's a partnership or cooperation and it has to be with the West, the one stipulation that I think makes sense is joint investment in the aid and reduction of aid eventually by the West so that that can be self-sufficient on the continent. That'd be an ideal scenario if you're going to have to do these kinds of deals. And as we've mentioned on many occasions, ideally you don't have to, but it's just where we are today. Moving on to the next story. So in a rare judgment in Belgian involvement in the former colony, a Belgian court actually ordered that a 93-year-old former diplomat stand trial for the 1961 assassination of Patrice Lumumba, Congo's former prime minister and independence icon. This is now just a trial that hasn't started as of yet, but the judgment is saying that he should stand trial. So we will play a video from DW News and have some commentary on the other side.
One of Africa's most brutal political killings may finally get its day in court. More than 60 years after the assassination of Patrice Lumumba, Congo's independence icon, a former Belgian diplomat has been ordered to stand trial. Lumumba's family welcomed the decision as a step forward that's a little closer to justice.
Some people might ask what this is about. Is it a matter of revenge, but of reparations in the form of money or something? But it's not the case. This is a matter of recognition, a matter of understanding, and what we currently ask of the court is quite simple. We just want the truth. Etienne Davignon is the last living of 11 Belgians indicted for their alleged role in Lumumba's death. Now 93, Davignon was a junior aide in the Belgian Foreign Ministry in 1960 when Congo gained independence from its colonial ruler, Belgium. Records revealed in an inquiry showed Belgium was working to undermine Lumumba's government, and that Davignon, who was posted in Kinshasa at the time, was responsible for providing a legal justification to have Lumumba removed from office. After his work in Congo, Davignon rose up in the ranks of the Belgian Foreign Ministry and even became an EU commissioner. Davignon is facing charges of participation in war crimes, including depriving a prisoner of war the right to a fair and impartial trial and inflicting degrading and inhumane treatment. And who exactly was Patrice Lumumba? Well, he became Congo's first prime minister after independence. He was in office for just a few months before a rift with Belgium led to his overthrow in a coup, followed by his imprisonment and torture. Lumumba was executed by firing squad with the support of Belgian mercenaries. And to hide the murder, Lumumba's killers cut his body in pieces and dissolved it in a barrel of acid. A Belgian officer at the scene kept Lumumba's tooth as a trophy. In 1991, a Belgian parliamentary inquiry concluded that Belgium bore moral responsibility for Lumumba's killing. Activists say putting Davignon on trial is a crucial step towards truth and justice for victims. Lumumba's killing not only violently took a man from his family, it also robbed a nation of a democratically elected leader. We will never know what path Congo might have been on today. All
right, I'll leave it there. We all know what's happening in the DRC right now, and we've talked about it on many occasions. And what we just witnessed or what we just reviewed was exactly what led to where the Congo is today. So what she was saying there is who knows where Congo would be right now if Patrice Lumumba actually had the opportunity to govern the country. I think it was within 6 months this happened, that he was elected prime minister. So your thoughts, Gloria, on this particular trial that is meant to commence for this 93-year-old, the last remaining member of the group that took part in this, the 11 that were indicted.
Thank you, Joe. It's been 65 years. On January 17, there was obviously a lot of social media noise, if you will, around Lumumba's unaliving. Very, very hurtful to not just to Congo, but to the entire continent. Unaliving of this man, needless unaliving. And I did a 3-part series on my page where I talked about the CIA's involvement, the use of the initial plan to actually put something in his drink or toothpaste or his food or something like that. I talked about how Congo's uranium powers the world, and how, because of that, there was a lot of interest in Congo to take out a man who was actually protecting Congo's resources. And of course, I did talk about the actual event and everything that happened, and we did hear that in the narration as well. So I'm going to spare everyone the story of what led to that day. But I do want to state, and this is why I'm making all this reference, this is why it's so important that we tell our stories. I keep saying it, telling African stories is actually very difficult because it's the most suppressed history. Africa has the most suppressed history on earth. And ironically, it's the darkest. You cannot come out and say we shouldn't talk about what happened in Germany. You can't tell people not to talk about that. So why suppress anything to do with, the very unfair treatment that the Black race has suffered throughout history? I want to give a massive shout out to Michael. I'm sorry, I think his name is pronounced Michael Mboladinga from Congo, who actually stood, the Congolese super fan who went viral during the 2025 Africa Cup of Nations. I guess something great did come out of AFCON, for acting as a living statue of Patrice Lumumba. People like that have brought attention. I'm not saying it's only because of him this happened, but we have to give him some credit for that, because he forced the world to look up Lumumba and see why this man was so important in history. Because again, African history has been so suppressed, and this is why we need to keep talking about it. People go, it's so dark, don't talk about it. It would be so easy to do lighthearted content. We could just come and talk about, travel and beautiful things, but is that, to what extent is that helpful to the continent? We need those stories, but we also need closure. We need justice for our leaders who were mistreated and who were unalived for no just cause. Patrice Lumumba's story is a powerful one. I don't think we can share it enough. Davignon, I don't care if you're 93, if you're 203, you need to face trial for what you did. And whoever else is involved, the CIA needs, whoever else is involved needs to be investigated, and this man should get full justice.
Yes and yes. I think that, what we find a lot is that other countries, especially in Europe, have been holding their leaders and former leaders accountable for things that they've done in their past, even if it's revealed 40, 60 years later. We see that with the files that were just released in part by the FBI, that law required them to release. You notice that because of those file releases, people in Europe are feeling the consequences, but there aren't former leaders in the United States that are. And the same thing in this instance. As you mentioned, it's clear that there were actors from the West, specifically the United States, involved in this process. And we don't hear anything about anyone involved being indicted, first of all, because there were at least 11 were indicted in Belgium in the 90s. We don't hear about any indictments here. We do know the head of the CIA at that time ended up becoming a president of the United States. So I'm pretty sure I have the timeline right on that. And he's the parent of another president of the United States. So, obviously, there's no even conspiracy there. There's just the facts. And so they have like a political dynasty in the United States. So nothing really happens to anything that they did during their time in office or operating within the CIA. So, but at least there is something happening in Belgium, and we can hope that the more we tell these kinds of stories, the more that justice gets served for the past crimes done to our people and really all around the world. With that, we go on to our last major story with Botswana, and they deny hosting a U.S. military base and reaffirm their sovereignty. So the government of Botswana had issued a denial regarding the rumors that the U.S. was planning a military base within its borders, specifically addressing the speculation surrounding a specific air base. So they dismissed the claims as fake news and cross-border misinformation. So officials clarified that the facility remains a sovereign installation, the one that's already there, and entirely controlled by the Botswana Defense Force. So this story is from First Post News. We are going to hear from them and have some commentary on the other side.
Our next story is from Botswana. The country has issued a firm response to rumors around foreign military presence. Botswana's government has denied hosting a US military base. It dismissed the rumors as fake news driven by speculation. This clarification comes at a time when the US and its ally Israel are locked in a war with Iran.
Botswana does not host a United States military base. The Bafachwa Air Base is a sovereign military installation owned, operated, and controlled entirely by the Botswana government through the Botswana Defense Force.
The focus of these rumors has been the Tebe Air Base. The government said that the base serves Botswana's national interests by enhancing emergency response capabilities, supporting regional peacekeeping and humanitarian efforts, and maintaining the operational readiness of its armed forces.
There's a little known trick to getting started in real estate, making $1,000, $2,000, or even $10,000 a day. It doesn't require you to put give your own money.
Sorry, guys, I skipped the story and it went right into ads. My apologies. And I skipped the story as well. But Gloria, your thoughts on Botswana, and we'll get back to the Ghana story after that. There's one more story.
Here I was thinking we had like some sponsor on the program. I'm like, yay, real estate.
We do not.
Right. But we're getting there. So yeah, we're calling out to all potential sponsors. If you have the business you would like to promote. But anyway, so obviously anything to do with Africa claiming its own sovereignty, I am for. I will keep pushing for it. I know Joe will keep pushing for it. Anything where we get to make our own decisions with our own resources. Because what we need to understand is that these resources do not belong to our leaders. I mean, they belong to them in a sense, but it's a communal thing. We collectively own the resources. So, you know, going back to the story of Zambia and the US, for any country that thinks they can just cart away our natural resources to whoever it is outside the continent or even within the continent, as long as it's not benefiting the people in any way, then that is nothing but corruption. That is actually, for lack of a better word, that is basically stealing. You're looting from the people. So the Ghanaian government breaking this.
Sorry, Gloria, I just want to mention, this was the Botswana video. I skipped the story and I went to Botswana. And
oh my God, are you serious?
Yeah, that was my fault. So I skipped
my bad, and I wasn't paying attention.
So I went to the Botswana military base. I just don't want to confuse the folks. That was my fault. I skipped the story.
Thank you for interjecting. You know what? Why don't you go ahead and analyze that? So I don't.
Yeah. So look, you know, to your point, sovereignty, right? I mean, you know, there's a rumor basically that was stating that there was a military base, an Air Force base in Botswana that that the United States was going to be taking over, right? And Botswana says no. Now, one of the things that we do know is that the continent of Africa has more military bases from the United States than any other continent in the world, right? There are a number of military bases all around the continent of Africa. Many people believe that it's because of the natural resources all around the continent of Africa. You know, I think what's generally said publicly is it's more about safety and assisting and all these other kinds of things. But I think most people are of the belief system that it is about the resources. And so Botswana obviously has diamonds and lots of mineral wealth. And in fact, they recently discussed taking a percentage of De Beers, if I'm not mistaken. I think we reported on that. And so they're looking for more sovereignty around their natural resources, taking a stake in the company that had been purchasing from them. And then I think they're also working to do some refining of the resources in country before exporting it as well. I think that that's another recent story. So it seems like this new president in Botswana, not as popular or as well known, I should say not as well known. He seems popular within country, but as well known internationally as some of the other leaders that we talk about. But he's been making some strides internally, specifically around this, looking to buy a percentage of De Beers so that they actually own some of the process before it's exporting and actually refining the minerals, and you know, having more to do with the with the refinement and then the eventual sale. So it seems like he's making a lot of decisions that are to the benefit of the people of Botswana. So yeah, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but that's I think where we're looking at with this video.
I think you've said it all in the interest of time.
Okay. And then the last one is we will go to Ghana, and to the story that Gloria was just referencing. You know, Ghana is accelerating its push towards resource nationalization. So very similar in the sense that Botswana was doing as well. But one thing that's really interesting is that Ghana has reclaimed control of the Damang gold mine in Western region, which was operated by South Africa's gold fields for 30 years. So the government seized the mine in April last year after rejecting a lease renewal, citing failure to declare verifiable reserves. So this is still dealing with a continental reclaim, not necessarily a reclaim of any businesses outside of the continent, but we're moving in the right direction. We see this a lot, of course, with Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. Botswana is also starting to do that as well. So what we're seeing is that there are some leaders and heads of state that have been kind of following in the footsteps of what we've seen in the AES. So let's go to this video from First Post, and then we'll have some commentary on the other side.
And Ghana is accelerating its push for resource nationalism. After nearly 3 decades, a foreign mining giant is out and local players are moving in. For 30 years, the Damang gold mine in western Ghana was run by South Africa-based Goldfields, but that era is now over. The Ghanaian government has reportedly rejected Goldfields' lease renewal, citing a failure to declare verifiable reserves. Instead, authorities seized the mine in April last year and are now vetting 3 local bidders to take over.
All right, Gloria, your thoughts on seizing the mine and vetting 3 local bidders to take over. I know you started earlier, but just to complete your thought. I think you're muted.
Just in conclusion, at the end of the day, it's all about sovereignty for every African country. And if Ghana is able to keep their mining and keep things nationalized and local, I think that is a great first step. Now, whatever happens after that, obviously, we can only hope that the government does things in the interest of the people. But I think that is an incredible first step. And I hope we have more African countries doing the same.
There you go. Yeah. And I will say of all of the inaugurations and presidential wins across the continent since I think it was 2022 when Ibrahim Traore took over Burkina Faso. There was one notable inauguration that Ibrahim Traore from Burkina Faso attended outside of the AES, and that was Ghana, when President John Mahama took over as president in his second term, you know, after a 2-term interim. Another president during the 2 terms that Mahama was out of office, Ibrahim Traore went to his inauguration, and there were a lot of discussions on cooperation. We discussed this briefly. There was some security and cooperation agreements that were done recently between Ghana and Burkina Faso, and we see Ghana seems like following in the footsteps of some of what Burkina Faso had done. Now this is a lease renewal, so it was really easy to not renew something as opposed to just stopping it middle of contract and taking it over, which is what had been happening in the AES. So it is a step in the right direction, because they're going to allow 3 companies within the country to bid on it. What I'd like to see is if there are any other leases that are up for other European countries, if the same is done. But yes, we love to see Africa taking back its natural resources, and we hope to see these funds go back towards the development and the advancement of the Ghana people. With that, we have a couple of stories from around the continent that we wanted to get into. Some of you may or may not be aware, Idris Elba was knighted by the King of England. Generally an honor for very few. You know, you'll hear the name Sir before their name. You ever heard Sir Elton John or Sir Paul McCartney, right? These sirs before your name means you've been knighted by the king. And at one point, for 90 years or whatever, 70 years or so, it was the Queen of England, right? She was knighting different people. So Sir Elton John, Sir Paul McCartney were knighted by the former Queen. Now the King, Charles, is the head of the family now, and he is knighting folks. And so he has knighted Idris Elba. Any thoughts, Gloria, on this knighthood by Idris?
Sir Joe Hatagwa has a ring to it, if you ask me. I call you that anyway. But interesting one. And I remember when you shared the story, I was like, oh, wow. And then you were like, yeah. And then I was like, oh. On one hand, obviously, we have to look at Idris's journey. You know, son of immigrants. Obviously, he's from, is he from your country?
Ghana and Sierra Leone. One parent from each country. One parent from each country. Yes.
Oh, nice. So, you know, it's a beautiful story, you know, when you look at it. And obviously, with the controversy that comes with the monarchy, you also look at it from another angle, like, whoa, you know. So at this point, I guess it's mixed feelings.
Yeah, same. Look, I mean, it shows that, you know, he's made an impact and he's doing a lot of great work. He was obviously invited to Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's wedding. You know, a lot of people, there was a lot of celebrities that showed up for that one. So, you know, he obviously has a relationship with the royal family. I think there's a lot of questions and concerns about the royal family's history in general and as it pertains to the continent of Africa. So, you know, I think that's why there's a lot of mixed feelings about this. But shout out to Idris for all the work that he's doing on the continent and for being recognized globally for the work that he does. Moving on to the next headline is there's an Israeli group that sent Palestinians from Gaza to South Africa. An investigation had unmasked a discreet operation transporting hundreds of Palestinians from the ruins of Gaza to South Africa and Indonesia, operating under the guise of a German-based Muslim charity called Al-Majid. The mission is reportedly spearheaded by Ad Khan, an Israeli organization founded by former intelligence officers. While the group describes the flights as quote-unquote humanitarian rescues for those desperate to escape 2 years of bombardment and famine, critics, including the South African government, label the initiative as a veiled campaign of ethnic cleansing. The report by the Associated Press reveals that the families paid up to $2,000 per person via cryptocurrency and bank transfers to secure passage through Israel's Raman Airport. Wow. Your thoughts on this story of the Gazans being shipped to South Africa and having to pay $2,000 to even get through Israel to be able to leave the Gaza Strip after what has been happening there?
I'm lost for words. I mean, it's scary. Is this for relief? And you know, the U.S. had hinted at this, you know, finding a place to put them. So it's all just very scary at this point. But I do want to keep my eye out on this story if I say the wrong thing.
Yeah. Looks like some people needed relief. They were looking for relief. They went to South Africa, but it was all done in a way that, you know, obviously was covert. $2,000 each paid just to be able to get safe passage. I mean, this is not the way you would anticipate something like this being done, right? There needs to be cooperation between the two countries, and by the two countries, I mean Palestine and South Africa. If this is what makes sense, you know, that would be what would be the way to do something like this if this was to happen, because it seems like the strikes will not be stopping anytime soon, unfortunately, on the Palestinians. And so it seems like there may be no other choice but to try to find ways to leave the country. Okay, last two stories. The president of Guinea was finally found, or finally resurfaced, after being gone for weeks. Thoughts? Anything you want to add to this?
Welcome back, sir. Speaking of sir.
Yeah.
Glad you've been found.
Yeah, I mean, what we find is that a lot of presidents on the continent leave their country to go get medical treatment. Very often, it's not really disclosed. In this case, it wasn't. He was just gone, and now he's back. So there are questions about why he was gone, where he went, but you know, it is what it is. I will mention that the leader of Guinea is also the leader after a overtake of the government, and he although in West Africa is not part of the Sahel region or the AES, not part of the AES. And so I've always been interested in why they hadn't included him. But we'll keep an eye on this and more. Okay, and then lastly,
maybe this is one of the reasons, but go on, Joe.
Potentially. Tinubu, president of Nigeria, visits the UK, and the old king himself assisted Tinubu in walking a few times, which has been a point of controversy. Viral videos showing that just speaks to some of the age of some of the leaders. Now, he hasn't ruled technically for as long as many of the other leaders his age, but it was quote unquote his turn when he was running. That was one of his campaign slogans. So and he's been behind the scenes of the APC party for a very long time, as many people who are from Nigeria do know. But anyway, your thoughts on his trip to the UK, all the controversy surrounding it.
Oh, I have to comment on this. Okay. Here's a video that I recorded, how Enugu changed Nigeria. This has to do with what happened in 1949, what the British did to some miners in 1949. This case has been reopened. Please feel free to check it out on on any of my platforms. How Enugu changed Nigeria. How the miners, who all they requested was fair treatment. I'm going somewhere with this. Mm-hmm. All they requested was fair treatment, to be paid, because they weren't even getting paid. Very poor treatment by the British who hired them, and they protested silently, peacefully. And the British, F.S. Phillip, the British superintendent, ordered his men to unalive these men. I think it was at least 21 miners with a lot injured. And the case has been reopened many years later. The British government owes these miners and they owe the families of these miners a ton of money. Now, I appreciate, I guess, the president doing what he can to, be diplomatic or whatever it is. I don't know the essence of this visit. She was, how do I phrase this? So because of the algorithm, something very tragic happened in Maiduguri in Nigeria, mm-hmm. and the president was in the UK. The first thing that came to my mind when you talked about this story was from one monarch to another. Yeah. If you know, you know, because mm-hmm. it's like Nigeria is basically a monarchy at this point. But he's in the UK. Something really tragic happened in Maiduguri where a ton of people were unalived, where some people unalive themselves to unalive other people. Read between the lines.
Self-unalivement. Yeah,
self-unalivement.
By bomb.
Good one, Joe. Yeah. So yeah, that happened, and our president is in the UK. Anyway, I say all that to say, I bring up the Enugu story to say, I hope you talk about that story. You have that conversation with the king. I hope you talk about all the injustice that has happened throughout, not just Nigeria, but throughout the continent, and you ask for justice for those people. It's not just about handshakes. It's a good thing you didn't make this the main story, because I would have had a lot to say, as you can tell.
Yes. And with that, I think we are at time. So thank you all for joining us, as long as you did. And look, we started a little bit late and we're ending a little later than usual, but we appreciate those who joined and watched all the way along. Make sure you come back and follow us next Thursday. We'll be back again for more from this week in Africa. So with that, thanks for watching. Oh, make sure you like, comment, subscribe. Sorry. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe, hit that thumbs up, share this with anybody you know who might be interested in news around the continent of Africa, and subscribe to the Gloria AO across all platforms and the Diaspora Station. And also go ahead and subscribe and follow at Authentic African. So with that, thanks for watching. See you all on the next video. Bye, guys.